James was a man who lived his life in quiet repetition. Every morning he woke up at exactly 6:30 a.m., brewed a cup of black coffee, and sat by the window of his small apartment, staring out at the city waking up below. His days were predictable: work, at the library, eat dinner alone, and spend evenings reading books or watching old movies. To anyone who knew him, James seemed content with his simple life. But beneath the surface, there was a heaviness that followed him wherever he went. It wasn't something he talked about, not even to himself. Yet it shaped every decision he made, every place he avoided, and every memory he tried so hard to bury. The source of this weight was a name James rarely spoke aloud: John. John had been his father, a man whose presence loomed large in James's mind, even though they hadn't spoken much in the years leading up to his death. 10 years had passed since John lost his battle with cancer. But for James, the pain felt as fresh, as if it happened yesterday. The reason? Guilt. Heavy, suffocating guilt that clung to him like a second skin. James and his father had never been close. Growing up, their relationship was strained, filled with arguments over things that now seemed trivial: grades, chores, broken promises. As a teenager, James resented his father's strictness, while John saw his son as ungrateful and distant. Neither of them knew how to bridge the gap between them, and over time, silence became their default language. When James moved out after high school, visits home grew fewer and farther between. Phone calls dwindled until they stopped altogether. By the time John fell ill, their bond was nearly non-existent. When James finally received the news about his father's diagnosis, it came too late. By then, John's cancer had progressed to an advanced stage, leaving little room for hope. James wanted to visit, to make amends, to tell his father everything he'd left unsaid. But fear held him back. The fear of rejection, of awkwardness, of facing the reality that his father might die without ever truly knowing him. So instead of going to the hospital, James stayed away, convincing himself that someone else would take care of John. Someone closer, someone better. After John passed, James attended the funeral out of obligation, standing silently at the back of the church while relatives cried and shared stories about the man he barely recognized. He watched as his father's coffin was lowered into the ground, feeling nothing but emptiness. The cemetery where John was laid to rest became a place James avoided at all costs. Even driving past it made his chest tighten. Year after year, on the anniversary of his father's death, family members sent messages reminding him to visit the grave. "It's important," they said. "Closure will help you heal." But James ignored them, finding excuses to stay away. Work was busy. Traffic was bad. The weather wasn't right. Deep down, though, he knew the truth. He couldn't face the grave because he couldn't face himself. The guilt gnawed at him constantly, whispering cruel reminders of his failures. He should have visited more often. He should have called. He should have tried harder to understand his father, to mend their broken relationship. Instead, he had let pride and fear stand in the way, and now it was too late. Standing before his father's grave would mean admitting all of this, not just to others, but to himself. And James wasn't ready for that. Life continued in its monotonous rhythm, each day blending into the next. James told himself he was fine, that he didn't need closure, that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. But deep inside, he knew he was lying. The unresolved pain lingered, manifesting in sleepless nights and moments of sudden sadness when memories of his father surfaced unexpectedly. At work, he found himself zoning out, staring blankly at shelves lined with books, wondering what his father would think of him now. Would he be proud? Disappointed? Indifferent? Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. James was sitting at his desk at the library, sorting through returned books, when his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text message from an unknown number. Curious, he opened it and read the words that would shake him to his core. "You need to come see your dad. He has something important to tell you." At first, James assumed it was a prank. Who could possibly know about his father? And why would anyone send such a bizarre message? He stared at the screen, rereading the words several times, trying to make sense of them. The tone wasn't playful or mocking. It sounded serious, almost urgent. For a moment he considered deleting the message and forgetting about it. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the timing, the way it arrived out of nowhere, interrupting his carefully constructed routine. Or maybe it was the tiny flicker of hope buried deep within him, the part that still longed for a connection with his father, even in death. Whatever the reason, James couldn't shake off the feeling that this message was meant for him. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he replayed the words in his mind. He has something important to tell you. What could it possibly mean? Was it a sign? A coincidence? Or was it something else entirely? For the first time in years, James allowed himself to entertain the idea of visiting his father's grave, not because he believed the message was real, but because it forced him to confront the questions he'd been running from for a decade. Could he forgive his father and himself for the mistakes of the past? And if he did go, what would he find waiting for him? As dawn broke the next morning, James made a decision. He didn't know what awaited him at the cemetery, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't keep running anymore. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. Little did he know, this choice would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. The next morning, James woke up earlier than usual. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with thoughts about the mysterious text message. It replayed in his head like a broken record. You need to come see your dad. He has something important to tell you. Those words haunted him, not just because they were strange and unexpected, but because they stirred emotions he had buried long ago. For years, James had convinced himself that he didn't care, that visiting his father's grave was unnecessary, but now the idea of going felt impossible to ignore. As he sipped his coffee, James tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was a wrong number. Someone else must have meant to send the message to another person named James. Or perhaps it was some kind of scam, a trick to lure him into giving away personal information. Yet none of these explanations felt right. The message hadn't included any links or requests for money. There was no obvious motive behind it. It simply existed, sitting there on his phone, demanding attention. James spent most of the day distracted, unable to focus on anything else. At work, he fumbled through tasks, misplacing books and forgetting where things belonged. His coworkers noticed his unease but didn't press him for answers. They knew James as a quiet, private man who rarely shared details about his personal life. If something was bothering him, they assumed he'd deal with it in his own time. By late afternoon, curiosity got the better of him. He pulled out his phone during a break and replied to the unknown number cautiously. "Who is this?" he typed, his fingers hovering over the screen before hitting send. Almost instantly, his phone buzzed with a response. "Your dad." The message read. "Trust me." James froze. His heart pounded in his chest as if it wanted to escape. How could someone know about his father? And why did they claim to speak for him? The word sent chills down his spine. Was this some cruel joke? A ghost from his past trying to torment him? Or was it possible, just maybe, that something supernatural was at play? For hours, James debated whether to reply again. Part of him wanted to dismiss the entire thing as nonsense and move on with his life. But another part, the part that still carried the weight of guilt and regret, was desperate for answers. What if the message was real? What if his father really did have something to say? The thought terrified him, but it also filled him with a sliver of hope. Hope that he might finally understand the man he never truly knew. Hope that he could find closure after all these years. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, James made up his mind. He decided to visit the cemetery, not because he believed the message was legitimate, but because he needed to confront his fears. If nothing else, standing before his father's grave might help him face the truth about their fractured relationship. With a heavy sigh, he grabbed his jacket and stepped out into the cool night air. The drive to the cemetery felt surreal, like stepping into a dream. James hadn't been there since the funeral, and even then he hadn't stayed long. Now as he approached the gates, memories flooded back in waves. He remembered the somber faces of relatives, the sound of dirt hitting the coffin, the overwhelming sense of emptiness that followed. Each step toward his father's grave felt heavier than the last, as though invisible weights were tied to his ankles. When James finally reached the headstone, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, resting against the cold granite, was a folded piece of paper. His breath caught in his throat. Who could have left it there? And how had they known he would come tonight? Trembling, James picked up the note and unfolded it carefully. Written in neat handwriting were the words, "I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. Please forgive me." Tears welled up in James's eyes as he stared at the message. It was simple, yet it carried a lifetime of meaning. These were the words he had always wanted to hear from his father, but never did. The apology he craved, during arguments, during missed birthdays, during moments of silence when both of them should have spoken but chose not to. Now, here they were, written plainly on a piece of paper, as if John himself had placed them there. But who could have written it? James scanned the cemetery, searching for signs of life. The place was eerily quiet, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. No one was around. He called out tentatively, his voice trembling. "Hello, is anyone here?" Only the rustling leaves responded. Whoever had left the note and sent the message was gone. Standing there, alone with his thoughts, James felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. Relief washed over him, knowing that his father had acknowledged their troubled relationship, even if it came posthumously. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, directed at himself for waiting so long to see closure, and above all, sadness lingered, reminding him of the years wasted on bitterness and resentment. He sat down beside the grave, clutching the note tightly in his hand. For the first time, he allowed himself to cry, not out of self-pity, but out of love. Love for the man who had raised him, flaws and all. Love for the memories they shared, however imperfect. And love for the possibility of forgiveness, not just from his father, but from himself. As the night grew darker, James realized he couldn't leave without answers. He snapped a photo of the note with his phone and vowed to investigate further. Someone or something had led him here tonight. Whether it was human, divine, or something beyond comprehension, James knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Over the next few days, James became obsessed with uncovering the truth. He scoured his contacts list, reaching out to family members and old friends, asking if anyone knew about the note or the text message. Most dismissed his questions as paranoia, while others expressed sympathy but admitted they had no answers. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, James turned to social media, posting anonymously in local community groups and forums. He described the situation without revealing too much, hoping someone might recognize the handwriting or offer clues. His persistence paid off sooner than expected. One afternoon, as he scrolled through replies to his post, a name caught his eye. Sarah. She introduced herself as a volunteer who had worked at the hospital where John spent his final months. According to her, she had grown close to James's father during that time, often sitting by his bedside and listening to his stories. Before passing, John had entrusted her with a box containing letters addressed to James, along with instructions to deliver them only if she believed he needed closure. James arranged to meet Sarah later that week. When they finally sat down together, she handed him the box with trembling hands. Inside were several handwritten letters, each sealed in its own envelope. As James held them, he felt a surge of emotion, fear, anticipation, gratitude, all swirling together in a whirlwind of uncertainty. Whatever secrets lay within those pages, he knew they would change his life forever. The meeting with Sarah left James feeling both overwhelmed and hopeful. As he carried the box of letters back to his apartment, his mind raced with questions. What did the letters contain? Would they finally give him the answers he had been searching for all these years? Or would they bring more pain, reopening wounds he thought were starting to heal. That night, James sat at his kitchen table, staring at the box as if it might suddenly open on its own. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. He wasn't just holding a collection of papers. He was holding pieces of his father's soul, fragments of a man he barely understood but desperately wanted to know. Taking a deep breath, James reached for the first envelope, carefully tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. His hands trembled as he unfolded it and began to read. The letter started simply, "Dear James." Just seeing his name written in his father's handwriting brought tears to his eyes. It was a voice from the past speaking directly to him across time. In the letter, John apologized for being distant, admitting that he had struggled to express love and affection. He explained how fear of failure as a parent had driven him to be overly critical, pushing James away instead of drawing him closer. "I always wanted you to succeed," John wrote, "but I realize now that my methods only made things worse. I'm sorry for not being the father you needed." Each sentence hit James like a wave, washing over him with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. There was sadness, yes, but also understanding. For the first time, he saw his father not as the stern, unapproachable figure he remembered, but as a flawed human being who loved him in his own imperfect way. By the time he finished the first letter, James was crying openly, clutching the paper tightly as if letting go would mean losing his connection to his father again. Over the next few days, James read through the rest of the letters one by one. Each one revealed a different side of John, a man who regretted missed opportunities, cherished memories of James's childhood, and dreamed of reconciliation. Some letters were filled with advice, offering guidance on life, relationships, and forgiveness. Others were deeply personal, sharing stories about John's own struggles growing up and the lessons he wished he could pass on to his son. One letter stood out in particular. In it, John described a moment from James's teenage years when they had argued violently over something trivial. James couldn't even remember what it was anymore. That fight had marked the beginning of their estrangement, leaving both of them too stubborn to reach out afterward. But in the letter, John confessed that he had spent countless nights replaying the argument in his mind, wishing he could turn back time and handle things differently. "I should have hugged you instead of yelling," he wrote. "I should have told you I loved you no matter what." Reading those words broke something inside James. All this time he had blamed himself for their broken relationship, convinced that he hadn't done enough to fix things. But now he realized that his father carried his own share of guilt and regret. Their pain wasn't one-sided, it was mutual, a tangled web of misunderstandings and unspoken apologies. And yet, despite everything, John's love for him shone through every line of every letter. As James absorbed the contents of the letters, he felt a shift within himself. The anger and resentment he had carried for so long began to loosen their grip, replaced by a sense of compassion for his father and for himself. He realized that holding on to grudges wasn't punishing John, it was punishing him. Forgiveness, he understood, wasn't about excusing the past. It was about freeing himself from its chains. With newfound clarity, James decided to return to the cemetery. This time, he didn't go out of obligation or curiosity. He went because he needed to. He needed to stand before his father's grave and say the words he had never said aloud. "I forgive you." On a crisp Saturday morning, James drove to the cemetery, the box of letters tucked safely under his arm. When he arrived, he found the headstone exactly where he had left it days earlier, still standing tall against the sky. Kneeling beside it, James placed the box gently at the base of the grave. Then, taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Dad," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I've read your letters. I finally understand. You weren't perfect, but neither was I. We both made mistakes and we both carried guilt for far too long. But I want you to know, I forgive you, and I hope you can forgive me too." Tears streamed down James's face as he spoke, each word carrying the weight of years of silence. For the first time in his life, he felt truly connected to his father, not as an authority figure or a source of disappointment, but as a person. A man who loved him, flaws and all. Afterward, James stayed by the grave for a while, talking about his life, his dreams, and the things he wished he could share with his father in person. He imagined John sitting beside him, nodding along, maybe even laughing at some of his jokes. The image brought him comfort, filling the void that had existed for so long. From that day forward, visiting the cemetery became a regular part of James's routine. It wasn't morbid or painful. It was healing. Each visit gave him a chance to reflect, to talk, and to feel close to his father in a way he never had before. He noticed small details during these visits, the way the sunlight filtered through, the trees casting shadows on the gravestones, the sound of birds chirping in the distance, the faint scent of flowers left by other visitors. These moments reminded him that life continued, even after loss. Word of James's transformation spread slowly among his family and friends. At first, they were surprised to see him taking such an active role in honoring John's memory. But soon they began to notice changes in James himself. He seemed lighter, happier, more at peace. Conversations with him no longer felt guarded or strained. Instead, he opened up freely, sharing stories about his father and expressing gratitude for the lessons he had learned. Inspired by his journey, James decided to organize a memorial event to celebrate John's life. He invited everyone who had known his father, family members, old friends, neighbors, and even Sarah, to come together and share their memories. The gathering took place on a sunny afternoon in the park near James's apartment. Tables were set up with photographs of John, mementos from his life, and copies of the letters he had written to James. As people mingled, laughter and tears flowed freely. Stories were told, hugs were exchanged, and bonds were strengthened. For James, the event was bittersweet. On one hand, it was comforting to see how many people cared about his father. On the other hand, it highlighted the fact that John was no longer there to witness the love and admiration surrounding him. Yet James found solace in knowing that his father's legacy lived on, not just in the letters, but in the impact he had on those around him. By the end of the day, James felt a profound sense of closure. He realized that forgiveness wasn't a destination. It was a process, a journey that required patience and effort. And though he would always miss his father, he knew he could carry their bond with him wherever he went. In the weeks that followed, James noticed subtle changes in his daily life. He smiled more often, laughed louder, and approached challenges with renewed determination. The guilt and regret that had once weighed him down were replaced by gratitude for the time he had shared with his father, however brief, and for the opportunity to make peace with the past. But James also knew that his journey wasn't over. Forgiveness had opened a door, but it was up to him to step through it and embrace the future. Little did he know, the lessons he had learned from his father's letters would soon guide him toward helping others navigate their own paths to healing. The memorial event for John was a turning point in James's life. It wasn't just about celebrating his father's memory, it was also about reconnecting with people who had known him. As the sun set on that warm afternoon, James stood by the park fountain watching families and friends laugh, share stories, and reminisce about John. For the first time in years, he felt surrounded not by grief, but by love. The event reminded him of something important. Relationships don't truly end when someone passes away. They live on through the memories we create, the lessons we learn, and the connections we nurture. One person who lingered after most guests had left was Sarah. She approached James hesitantly, holding a small photo album in her hands. "I thought you might want this," she said softly, handing it to him. Inside were pictures of John during his final months, smiling weakly in a hospital bed, sitting outside on sunny days, even sharing a quiet moment with Sarah as they talked about life. Each image painted a picture of a man James barely recognized, vulnerable yet full of hope, tired but still determined to find joy in the little things. "Thank you," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "These mean more to me than I can say." Sarah nodded, then paused before speaking again. "There's one more thing," she added. "Your dad told me something else before he passed. Something he wanted you to hear someday." James's heart skipped a beat. He had assumed the letters were the extent of what John had left behind. What else could there be? "What did he say?" James asked, his curiosity outweighing his apprehension. "He told me to tell you that he was proud of you," Sarah replied, her eyes glistening with tears. "He didn't care about grades or jobs or any of the things you two used to argue about. He just wanted you to know that he believed in you, and that no matter what happened between you two, he always loved you." The words hit James like a tidal wave. His knees nearly buckled under the weight of them. All those years of doubt, of wondering if his father cared, of blaming himself for their fractured relationship, all of it dissolved in that single sentence. John hadn't been perfect, but neither had James. And despite their mistakes, his father's love had never wavered. That night, James sat alone in his apartment, flipping through the photo album Sarah had given him. Each picture seemed to whisper fragments of his father's story, revealing layers of a man James wished he had known better. He realized how much of his anger toward John stemmed from assumptions that his father didn't care, that he was too busy judging to truly see James for who he was. But now, looking at these photos and rereading the letters, James saw the truth. His father had seen him all along. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not without flaws, but with a kind of unconditional love that transcended their arguments and misunderstandings. Inspired by this revelation, James decided to dig deeper into his father's life. If John had taken the time to write letters and leave messages for him, surely there were other pieces of his story waiting to be uncovered. Over the next few weeks, James reached out to relatives, old neighbors, and co-workers who had known John. He asked questions he had never dared to ask before. What was John like as a young man? How did he handle challenges? What made him laugh? Slowly, a fuller picture began to emerge. From his aunt, James learned that John had grown up poor, working odd jobs to support his family while dreaming of becoming a teacher, a dream he eventually abandoned due to financial pressures. From a childhood friend, he discovered that John had once been an avid guitarist, playing in local bands until life got in the way. And from a former co-worker, he heard stories of John's generosity, how he often helped struggling colleagues without expecting anything in return. Each detail added color to the portrait of a man James thought he knew, but was only beginning to understand. He realized that John's strictness and high expectations weren't born out of cruelty, but out of a desire to give James opportunities he himself had missed. His father's harsh words weren't meant to hurt. They were meant to push him toward greatness, even if the delivery was flawed. As James pieced together his father's history, he found himself reflecting on his own life. He thought about the choices he had made, the paths he had avoided, and the ways he had let fear hold him back. Growing up, he had resented John's criticism, interpreting it as rejection. Now he saw it for what it really was, a reflection of his father's hopes and dreams, not just for James but for himself. This newfound understanding sparked a change in James. He started taking small steps to honor his father's legacy in meaningful ways. At work, he volunteered to mentor teenagers who visited the library, offering guidance on school projects and career aspirations. Many of them reminded him of himself at that age, uncertain, searching for direction, and yearning for approval. James listened patiently, encouraging them to pursue their passions and reminding them that failure wasn't the end of the road. It was part of the journey. One boy, Marcus, stood out to James. He was shy and hesitant, rarely speaking unless prompted. During their sessions, James noticed how Marcus struggled to articulate his thoughts, often second-guessing himself. It reminded him of his own teenage years, when he felt misunderstood and dismissed by his father. Instead of pushing Marcus to open up, James gave him space, letting him know that it was okay to take his time. Gradually, Marcus began to trust James, sharing bits of his life and dreams. By the end of their mentorship, Marcus had gained confidence, thanks in large part to James's unwavering support. Through these interactions, James realized that helping others heal was a form of healing itself. Every conversation, Every shared laugh, every moment of connection brought him closer to forgiving himself for the past. He understood now that perfection wasn't the goal, growth was. Just as his father had tried his best, so too was James, doing his best one step at a time, but the journey wasn't without its challenges. Some days the weight of his grief returned unexpectedly, catching him off guard. On those days James would visit the cemetery, sitting quietly beside his father's grave, and talking about whatever was on his mind. Sometimes it was trivial things, like the new coffee shop he had discovered or the book he was reading. Other times it was deeper, more painful topics, the regrets he still carried, the fears that lingered in the corners of his mind. No matter what, he always ended each visit with the same words, "I miss you, Dad." Over time, James noticed another shift within himself. The visits to the cemetery no longer felt like obligations or acts of penance. They became moments of gratitude, reminders of the bond he shared with his father. Even though John was gone, his presence remained, a guiding force that encouraged James to keep moving forward. One day, while organizing his father's letters, James stumbled upon a note tucked inside the box. It was written in Sarah's handwriting. "Closure isn't forgetting, it's remembering with love." Those words resonated deeply with him. He realized that closure wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending everything was fine. It was about embracing the complexity of human relationships, the good, the bad, and everything in between, with compassion and understanding. With this realization, James decided to take his journey a step further. He began documenting his experiences, writing essays and reflections about loss, forgiveness, and healing. At first, he kept them private, using the process as a form of therapy. But as his confidence grew, he started sharing snippets online, hoping to inspire others who might be struggling with similar feelings of guilt and regret. To his surprise, his posts resonated with readers from all walks of life. People reached out to thank him, sharing their own stories of reconciliation and healing. Encouraged by the response, James expanded his efforts. He partnered with local community centers to host workshops on grief and forgiveness, drawing from both his personal experiences and the wisdom he had gleaned from his father's letters. These sessions became safe spaces where participants could openly discuss their struggles, knowing they weren't alone. For James, facilitating these conversations was both humbling and rewarding. It reinforced the idea that healing wasn't a solitary journey. It was a collective effort, strengthened by shared vulnerability and empathy. By the end of the year, James had transformed in ways he never imagined. The man who once avoided cemeteries and shied away from emotional conversations had become a beacon of hope for others navigating their own paths to peace. He still missed his father every day, but the ache had softened, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. Looking back, James realized that the mysterious message and the letters had been more than just catalysts for closure. They had been invitations to forgive, to remember, and to live fully. Through them, he had discovered not only his father's love but also his own capacity for resilience and growth. And yet, James knew that his journey was far from over. Life, he understood, was a constant cycle of learning, loving, and letting go. With each new day came fresh opportunities to honor his father's memory, not by dwelling on the past, but by building a future rooted in compassion and understanding. Months had passed since James first read his father's letters, and the transformation in his life was undeniable. What began as a reluctant journey toward closure had blossomed into something far greater, a renewed sense of purpose. Each day felt lighter, less burdened by the weight of regret that had once consumed him. He no longer avoided mirrors, literal or metaphorical. Instead, he faced himself openly, acknowledging both his flaws and his strengths. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't just about letting go of anger toward others. It was also about forgiving himself for the mistakes he'd made along the way. James continued to visit the cemetery regularly, not out of obligation but because it brought him comfort. Sitting beside his father's grave became a ritual, a sacred space where he could reflect on his progress, share updates about his life, and express gratitude for the lessons John had taught him, even if indirectly. During these visits, James often imagined his father sitting beside him, nodding approvingly or offering quiet advice. It was a comforting thought, one that helped ease the lingering ache of his absence. But James didn't stop there. Inspired by his own healing process, he threw himself into helping others navigate their struggles with grief and forgiveness. His workshops at community centers grew in popularity, drawing people from all walks of life who were searching for answers, or at least someone who understood their pain. At first, James worried that he might come across as preachy or insincere. After all, who was he to offer guidance? He was still figuring things out himself, but over time, he learned that vulnerability was his greatest strength. By sharing his story honestly without pretense, he created an environment where others felt safe to do the same. One evening, after a particularly emotional workshop, a young woman approached James hesitantly. Her name was Emily, and she looked barely older than 20. She introduced herself with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, explaining that her mother had passed away unexpectedly 6 months earlier. "I haven't been able to forgive myself," she confessed. "We fought so much before she died. I never got to say goodbye." James listened intently, recognizing echoes of his own pain in her words. He invited her to sit down, offering her a cup of tea from the thermos he always carried to events. For nearly an hour they talked about guilt, loss, and the overwhelming desire to turn back time. James didn't offer quick fixes or empty platitudes. Instead, he simply listened, validating her emotions and reminding her that healing wasn't linear. When the conversation ended, Emily thanked him with a shaky smile, promising to return to future workshops. Watching her leave, James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Helping others heal was becoming his calling, a way to honor his father's memory while making a difference in the world. As weeks turned into months, James expanded his efforts beyond workshops. He started writing more frequently, documenting not only his personal experiences but also the stories shared by participants in his sessions. These essays ranged from reflections on forgiveness to practical advice on coping with grief. To his surprise, they resonated deeply with readers, many of whom reached out to thank him for putting their feelings into words. Encouraged by the positive response, James decided to compile his writings into a book, a project he titled Letters Beyond Goodbye. The title was inspired by the letters his father had left behind, which had served as the foundation for his healing journey. Writing. The book proved to be both cathartic and challenging. On one hand, it allowed James to revisit his growth, celebrating how far he had come since that fateful text message led him to the cemetery. On the other hand, it forced him to confront lingering doubts and fears he hadn't fully addressed. There were moments when he questioned whether his story was worth telling, whether anyone would care about the struggles of a man who had spent years avoiding his father's grave. But then he remembered Emily and countless others like her who found solace in knowing they weren't alone. That realization kept him going, word by painstaking word. While working on the book, James reconnected with Sarah, the woman who had played such a pivotal role in delivering his father's final messages. They met occasionally for coffee, discussing everything from John's life to their shared passion for helping others. Over time, their friendship deepened, evolving into something neither of them had anticipated: romance. At first, James resisted the idea. He wasn't sure he was ready to open his heart again after years of solitude. But Sarah's kindness, patience, and understanding slowly broke down his walls. Together, they discovered joy in simple pleasures: long walks through the park, cooking meals together, and exchanging stories about their families. Though John wasn't physically present, his influence lingered in their relationship, binding them through shared memories and mutual respect. By the time Letters Beyond Goodbye was published, James's life had transformed in ways he never imagined. The book received widespread acclaim, praised for its raw honesty and relatable insights. Readers described it as a lifeline, a guidebook for navigating the messy, unpredictable terrain of grief and forgiveness. James was invited to speak at conferences, libraries, and schools, sharing his story with audiences eager to learn from his experiences. Yet, despite the newfound attention, He remained grounded, staying true to the values instilled in him by his father: humility, perseverance, and love. One of the most rewarding aspects of James's journey was reconnecting with old friends and family members. For years, he had distanced himself from them, convinced that they wouldn't understand his struggles. But now, armed with a deeper understanding of forgiveness, he reached out, mending broken ties and rebuilding relationships. His cousin Rachel, whom he hadn't spoken to in over a decade, admitted during one of their conversations that she too had struggled with guilt after John's death. "I always wondered if I could have done more," she confessed. Hearing her words, James realized that grief wasn't confined to individuals. It rippled outward, affecting entire families. By addressing his own pain, he had inadvertently given others permission to face theirs. Another unexpected outcome of James's work was the impact it had on his professional life. The library where he worked noticed his growing reputation and offered him opportunities to lead community programs focused on mental health and well-being. James jumped at the chance, organizing events that combined literature with therapy, encouraging participants to explore their emotions through storytelling. These initiatives not only strengthened his bond with coworkers, but also reinforced his belief in the power of connection. Despite these successes, James knew that healing wasn't a destination. It was an ongoing process. Some days were harder than others, especially around anniversaries or holidays that reminded him of his father. On those days, he allowed himself to grieve, knowing that sadness was a natural part of love. But he also reminded himself of how far he had come. The boy who once resented his father's criticism had grown into a man capable of seeing beyond surface-level disagreements, recognizing the love beneath the imperfections. Toward the end of the year, James organized another memorial event. This time inviting participants from his workshops to join him in celebrating not just John's life, but the lives of all loved ones lost. The gathering took place in the same park as before, under twinkling string lights strung between trees. Attendees brought photos, mementos, and stories, creating a vibrant tapestry of memories. As James stood at the center of it all, watching strangers connect through shared experiences, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. His father's legacy wasn't limited to the letters he had left behind. It lived on in every person James touched, every heart he helped heal. That night, as the event drew to a close, James walked to the cemetery alone. Standing beside his father's grave, he whispered softly, "Thank you. Not just for the letters, but for everything, for the challenges, the lessons, and the love that had shaped him into the person he was today." Then, placing a single flower on the headstone, he turned and walked away, ready to embrace whatever the future held. As the years rolled by, James found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed since that fateful day, when a mysterious text message led him to his father's grave. What started as a reluctant step toward closure had transformed into a journey of self-discovery, healing, and purpose. He often thought about the man he used to be, the one who avoided cemeteries, shied away from emotional conversations, and carried the weight of guilt like a second skin. That version of himself felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. James's book, Letters Beyond Goodbye, became a cornerstone of his new life. It wasn't just a memoir, it was a lifeline for countless readers who saw their own struggles reflected in its pages. The letters his father had written served as a bridge between past and present, reminding James, and those who read the book, that love endures even after death. Through sharing his story, James had created a ripple effect, inspiring others to confront their own pain and seek forgiveness. Emails poured in daily from people around the world, thanking him for giving them hope when they needed it most. One letter in particular stood out. It came from a teenage boy named Daniel, whose parents were going through a bitter divorce. "I feel like I'm losing both of them," Daniel wrote. "Your book made me realize that I can still love them, even if things aren't perfect." Reading those words brought tears to James's eyes. He remembered feeling the same way as a child. caught between two imperfect people who loved him, but didn't know how to express it without hurting each other. In replying to Daniel, James shared advice he wished someone had given him. Sometimes, loving someone means forgiving them for not being who you want them to be. It doesn't mean forgetting or excusing their mistakes. It means choosing to see the good in them anyway. Helping others heal became James's mission, but it also deepened his understanding of his own journey. Every conversation, every workshop, and every heartfelt thank you note reminded him that forgiveness wasn't a one-time event. It was a lifelong practice. There were still moments when old wounds resurfaced, especially during holidays or quiet evenings when loneliness crept in. But instead of letting those feelings consume him, James channeled them into creativity. He began painting, a hobby he hadn't explored since childhood, using bold colors and abstract shapes to express emotions too complex for words. His artwork, displayed at local galleries, told stories of loss, redemption, and resilience, resonating with viewers on a visceral level. Sarah remained a constant presence in James's life, her support unwavering as he navigated this new chapter. Together, they built a home filled with laughter, warmth, and mutual respect. Though their relationship wasn't without challenges, they approached difficulties with open hearts, knowing that vulnerability was key to lasting connection. On weekends, they visited the cemetery hand in hand, leaving flowers not just for John but for other graves nearby. They believed that no one should be forgotten, whether by family or strangers. Their act of kindness sparked a movement within their community, inspiring others to join them in honoring forgotten souls. In addition to mentoring teenagers at the library, James expanded his efforts to include adults struggling with unresolved grief. He partnered with therapists and counselors to create support groups where participants could share their stories without judgment. One group member, an elderly woman named Margaret, became particularly close to James. She had lost her husband decades ago but never allowed herself to grieve fully, fearing that doing so would make her appear weak. Through their sessions, she finally found the courage to confront her pain, breaking down barriers she had erected long ago. Watching Margaret embrace life again reinforced James's belief that healing was possible at any age. James also stayed connected with Emily, the young woman who had once confided in him about her strained relationship with her late mother. Over time, she emerged from her shell, finding strength in vulnerability. With James's encouragement, she began volunteering at the library, helping children discover the magic of storytelling. Seeing her transformation filled James with pride, knowing that he had played a small part in her journey. When Emily announced that she was pursuing a degree in social work, James hugged her tightly, whispering, "You're going to change lives." Despite his successes, James never forgot the lessons he had learned along the way. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about integrating it into the present, allowing it to shape but not define you. He continued visiting his father's grave regularly, not because he needed closure anymore, but because it brought him peace. Each visit felt like a conversation, a chance to update John on everything happening in his life. Sometimes James imagined hearing his father's voice in response, a gentle laugh, a word of encouragement, or simply silence, which was comforting in its own way. One crisp autumn morning, as James sat beside the headstone, he noticed something unusual. Resting against the granite was another folded piece of paper, similar to the one he had found years earlier. His heart raced as he picked it up, half expecting to find another cryptic message. Instead, the note contained just 3 words: "I'm so proud." Tears streamed down James's face as he clutched the paper, realizing that these words weren't meant to haunt him. They were meant to heal him. Whether sent by fate, coincidence, or something beyond comprehension, the message affirmed what James already knew. His father's love transcended time and space, living on in every choice he made, every person he helped, and every moment he embraced fully. That evening, James shared the note with Sarah, who smiled knowingly. "It seems your dad isn't done talking to you yet," she said softly. James nodded, feeling a mix of awe and gratitude. Though he couldn't explain the origin of the message, he didn't need to. Its meaning was clear. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Looking back, James marveled at how far he had come. From avoiding his father's grave to organizing memorial events, from blaming himself for their fractured relationship to celebrating the love they shared, his journey had been anything but predictable. Yet, through it all, he had discovered something profound. Forgiveness wasn't just about mending broken relationships, it was about creating new ones. By letting go of guilt and resentment, he had opened himself up to a world of possibilities: friendships, romance, mentorship, and artistry. The final chapter of James's story wasn't marked by grand gestures or dramatic revelations. Instead, it unfolded quietly, in the everyday moments that made life beautiful. Walking through the park, he spotted a boy sitting alone on a bench, staring at the ground with a defeated expression. Without hesitation, James approached him, striking up a conversation. As they talked, James recognized the same loneliness and confusion he once carried. He offered words of encouragement, sharing bits of wisdom gleaned from his own experiences. Watching the boy smile reminded James of the ripple effect of healing. Not only had he found peace, but he was now helping others do the same. Though his father was gone, James knew their bond remained stronger than ever. In letting go of guilt and embracing forgiveness, he had uncovered a love that transcended lifetimes. And in doing so, he learned that true connection isn't bound by time or space. It lives on in the hearts of those willing to remember.